Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lambda Legal's State of Transgender's Rights webinar of what Lambda Legal's work is doing to protect TGNCNBI communities. My name is Sami Nemir Olivares. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm Director of Strategic Communications. And we're very excited to have you all today. As you know, in the past year, a lot has happened to our transgender, gender non-conforming, non-binary, and intersex communities. And we know that Lambda Legal has been working around the clock to protect, but also even to expand our rights and defend our community. In the next hour, we will be covering some of the work that Lambda Legal has been doing this past year through the courts, but also through state legislation and public education. And all of this work with the intention to combat and address the long list of anti-trans policies from the Trump administration has implemented since taking office, from healthcare to ID, passports, and so much more to the state level. And now I would like to introduce you the wonderful panel of speakers that we have today. We would like to make sure that they introduce themselves. We have amazing and talented and dedicated TGNC lawyers at Lambda Legal who are behind many of these lawsuits and the policy work protecting our community. We're very close to the work that they do. Many of them are leading the lawsuits against the Trump administration anti-LGBTQ policies, such as the Trump transgender military ban, as well as the policies prohibiting accurate U.S. passports. So I will not do justice introducing all of the wonderful bios, but if I can ask you to introduce yourselves, pronouns, and what's your title?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today. My name is Sasha Bookert. I use she and her pronouns, and my title is Counsel/Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project Director. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Carl.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you here today. Thank you for attending our presentation. My name is Carl Charles. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an attorney with Lambda Legal in our Southern Regional Office here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'll pass it to Whit.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. My name is Whit Washington. I'm the Eileen Amy Ryan Senior Attorney for the Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project, and I use they, them pronouns. And with that, I'll pass it to Allie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alexandra or Allie Kurd. I use she, they pronouns. I am staff policy attorney here at Lambda in our DC office.
Thank you so much to the panelists. You will be hearing a lot of their expertise and what they're working on very soon. But before we go deeper into the policy work, we want to acknowledge how difficult this year has been for many in our communities, experiencing a government that wants to erase or criminalize even our identities. So it's something that has given us hope and strength is the solidarity, the resiliency, and the love of our community. We receive many of your messages. The lawyers here also receive many of your messages. We receive over 200 questions. And while we might not be able to answer all of them, we will follow up via email after this in the coming days and weeks. So stay tuned for some answers to many of your questions. But many of the questions were about what can we do as a community? How can we do as an allies? And people wanting to hear from our lawyers, what is the work that is being done? So I would like to start with one of the questions that we received from the audience that reads, if there is one message you could offer to the people, to our community, including those that are scared, what would that message be? We could start with Sasha.
Oh, thank you, Sammy, and thank you everybody again for joining the webinar. I am really grateful for this question, and I'm grateful that we're, putting it at the very start. Oftentimes, this kind of gets raised at the end as an afterthought, and it's just so important, I think, to give people hope in this moment. To quote Harvey Milk, the message I want to share is just that I want to make sure that we acknowledge, and I acknowledge that there's real pain and fear in the trans and non-binary community right now. This is truly a dark and difficult moment. But I do believe also that there is a certain trajectory that every human rights movement goes through that's captured in the phrase that, first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. And I think all of those things have been true if you look at our history. And this is, in my opinion, without a doubt, the fight. And we have to keep fighting. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And every trans person who refuses to hide who they are, you're making a demand. Every time we show up in a courtroom, we're making a demand. In our communities, when we're out in our communities and in our daily lives, we're making a demand. And I'm grateful and proud to be a part of this work along each of you and our allies. There's no escaping again that this is a difficult moment, but I want you to know that at Lambda Legal, and I know I can speak for all of our sister organizations, this is an all hands on deck moment. And we are fighting with everything that we have, just as we have throughout our 50+ year history at Lambda Legal, and we will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Whit, I have you next in screen.
Thank you. I know this is such a scary moment, and people are exhausted and overwhelmed by the constant barrage of attacks. But this moment is a really great opportunity for us to recommit to one another and to community, because when we come together, we build something stronger. When things get dark, we turn towards each other. We remember that trans and non-binary people have faced countless attempts to erase us, and yet we continue to thrive. I invite each of you to reflect on how you show up every day, for yourself, for your loved ones, for your communities, and for others who may be experiencing similar discrimination in our society. We're not alone, you're not alone, and together we can be very powerful. Thank you.
Who wants to go next? I have Ali next in the screen.
Cool, I can go next. So I'm not going to pretend things aren't scary right now. I know we can all feel it, even those of us who are in positions and areas that are relatively safe. But one thing that gives me hope is knowing that we as a community have survived so much more, and we've made it this far. We've made it so far. And so we've always found ways to thrive and live beautiful, full lives, even when we're in the face of adversity. And so I have hope because I know we have elders with endless knowledge and wisdom and advice to offer us. And we have so many young people who are really gung-ho and really hungry to fight the fight. And so even when you're tired and you're exhausted and burned out, you're running on E, just know that even in those moments, your joy is enough. Your joy is revolutionary. There are people who would see your smile as an affront to them on its own. So just know that when you feel like you can't fight anymore, just finding a way to feel free and joyous and in community, that's so much more than, so many of them can say about when they are in community. So just find the beauty, find the joy. And that's what gives me hope, is that we are just a community that's so full of love and full of joy, and we fight and we thrive no matter what. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ali. And Carl?
Not much to say beyond what my colleagues have said, which I find very inspiring and uplifting. I will just add that we are collectively facing a huge bully who is trying to terrorize us in so many different ways and so many different intersections in our lives. But the bully's goal is to make us feel isolated. And folks have already sort of given a nod to this, but my message of hope is that despite the messages that we are alone and the administration's attempts to divide us, we need to reject that and to find connection in our communities, sort of on the most local level, in places and with friends and other, chosen family members who can help us find the strength to face each day. And rejecting that message that we are alone and we are isolated is where we can really resist the bullying and terrorizing that our opponents are bringing to us each day. So I just want to emphasize to you all watching today that you're not alone. Lambda Legal is with you. All of us here on this panel work countless hours with that goal in mind, right? That we want you to feel connected, protected, and not divided, but instead together.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those beautiful words, and received our gratitude from a lot of the audience. I see in the chats in YouTube and many other platforms a lot of messages of love and gratefulness to you all. So this is one community. So now transitioning to some of the litigation that's what Lambda Legal is best known for 50 years. Let's start with the big picture at the federal level. Under the Trump administration, Lambda Legal has filed many lawsuits. Sasha, can you walk us through some of the actions that Lambda has taken to react to the executive orders and policy shifts that are, against the transgender community?
Absolutely. Before I, jump into that, though, I do want to say, make a couple of, I do want to say a couple of things. One is that, we are standing up and responding to the attacks from the Trump administration, but it's really important that we walk and chew gum at the same time. And, we don't have time to talk about them today, but there's been a whole host of victories on the state level this year. Richard Sines, our criminal misconduct expert, has been victorious in a number of different cases. We've won birth certificate cases. And there's a whole range of different things, an injunction in Iowa stopping a Don't Say LGBT bill from moving forward. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to talk about some of those things, but I want to raise them up and happy to chat later about them. And also, I also want to point out, too, that something I've noticed over the last couple of years, and I think, I'm in my own little silo, so I don't see what's happening in the larger world all the time. But I do want to just comment that I'm really impressed with the fact that, so many trans lawyers are really stepping up in the last few years. Just this year alone, we've seen 3 Lambda Legal lawyers argue cases in front of a state Supreme Court and 2 circuit courts of appeals. Last year, Chase Strangio doesn't work for Lambda Legal, of course, but was the first openly trans person to argue in front of the Supreme Court. So I think that we are making significant advancements in the world. So really proud of that fact. And I feel a little guilty about talking about the cases that we brought against the Trump administration. So I want to clarify that although I know about them, I haven't been working on them in the way that a lot of our colleagues have. So I want to lift up their work and make sure I recognize it, and also recognize one person in particular, our colleague Omar Gonzalez-Pagan, who has been, the driver of a lot of the cases that we're going to talk about today. So I just want to make sure we give recognition where it's due. But the first case I'll just talk about, if we could change the slide, in talking about our fights in 2025 against the Trump administration policies, is the case PFLAG v. Trump, which was a case that involved an executive order that sought to withhold money from medical providers and institutions that offer gender-affirming medical treatments for anyone under 19. Lambda Legal, along with our partners at the ACLU and the ACLU of Maryland, as well as a couple of law firms, filed a lawsuit in Maryland on behalf of a couple of organizations challenging that restriction, arguing that this, contrary to what the administration might think, that there's still a thing called the separation of powers, and that the executive branch doesn't have this unlimited authority to condition funding. And interestingly enough, one of their arguments most recently has been that they aren't actually requiring facilities to deny treatment, even though that's been the result of these policies all along. But in any case, we made arguments that this violated the separation of powers and equal protection, and violated the Affordable Care Act, and that led to an injunction that was issued on March 4th of this year, which allows hospitals to, that we're representing here, to continue to provide gender-affirming care for folks under 19. So that was a pretty significant victory, and that's been in place, since then, since March, and now the current status of that case is that the Department of Justice, as they do in almost all of these cases, has appealed the injunction to the Circuit Court of Appeals, and so the court in Richmond, Virginia, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, will hear an oral argument sometime between January 27th and 30th. So it's just a significant victory. We know that, unfortunately, there are some providers that are, stopping care, but this has protected a lot of them and provided, cover for them to do the right thing to make sure that people are getting the care that they need as a result of this injunction. So really proud to be, part of an organization that led to this victory. The second case that I'll talk about, briefly, and again, one other note is that if folks don't know this already, we have on our website, there are pages that are dedicated to all of these cases. So if you just, if you just Google PFLAG v. Trump and Lambda Legal, you'll go to the web page that will give you links if you're a nerd and really want to nerd out on all the legal arguments and the orders, et cetera. You can go there, and you can link to the actual documents to take a closer look. And then the second case I wanted to talk about was a case called, if we can go to the next slide, please, is actually, I think it's the one after, yeah, that one. Thank you. It's the San Francisco AIDS Foundation v. Trump. And this case involved an executive order that was issued by the Trump administration seeking to defund organizations that provided trans folks with life-saving services. And we filed a case on behalf of multiple LGBTQ folks and HIV organizations in the Northern District of California. The executive order sought to terminate grants and prohibit contractors and grantees from, employing DEI principles and prohibiting grantees from recognizing and respecting transgender folks. And we made a couple of arguments, that are pretty similar to the case we talked about earlier under the Equal Protection Clause and the Affordable Care Act. And the defendants made some, rather specious arguments, in my opinion, that are claiming that they aren't actually, basing the discrimination on the characteristics of the recipients, but just merely particular generalized topics. That argument didn't win the day. And again, like the PFLAG v. Trump case, that led to a significant win on June 9th. 2025, enjoining those provisions from going into place, and adding $62 million back to the organizations that brought these lawsuits. So that was a significant victory as well this year. And that case, like the other case, is set for an oral argument in February or possibly March, and that'll take place in San Francisco on this question about the injunction that the Department of Justice appealed. So I know I only have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to condense, the next couple. The next case is the Glamma v. Trump, and if we could, yeah, thank you. And this is a case involving, a Trump administration action, that led to them dropping funding for critical research on HIV grants and LGBTQ health issues, and that was, a case that was filed by Lambda Legal, representing a few organizations, making the arguments that this violated, again, the Affordable Care Act and equal protection. And this also led to a injunction, prohibiting the NIH from not providing grant funding for the research that needs so sorely and desperately needs to be done on behalf of LGBTQ folks. And that injunction was put into place on August 4th of this year. So another win. There's 3 wins. And then the fourth case I'll talk about here is the Schilling v. Trump, which is a challenge that we brought to the ban on open transgender military service, along with the Human Rights Campaign. And we are representing 7 plaintiffs and an organization, and filed a lawsuit, in February after the executive order was issued. And we had a hearing in the Western District of Washington, and that led to an enormous victory, thanks to my colleague Kel Olson, who argued that case in the hearing, and led to a really powerful injunction. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice appealed this case all the way to the Supreme Court, who did stay the injunction. But we did recently have a hearing or an argument in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on this case in October 20th, and we are hopeful that will lead to a positive decision, and then we'll go back to the Supreme Court for them to either take the case or let the injunction go back into place. So we'll keep folks up to date on that, and I'm sure that'll be communicated through all of our social media channels. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. And this will be the last case that I'll talk about. This is a little different than the others in that this isn't a response to the Trump administration executive orders, but it's one to raise up because it's coming soon. And that is a challenge that we brought where we were victorious with, back in 2024, involving the state of West Virginia's categorical exclusion for gender-affirming care under their Medicaid plan. And that was a huge victory that got appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, where we were victorious again. But in the intervening period, the Supreme Court issued the Scrimeti decision back in June, and there's been a lot of kerfuffle about how some of the victories that we've had will eventually be viewed under the Scrimeti decision. So this case is going back up to the Fourth Circuit to reconsider, as well as a couple of other cases that we've had victories in the past. But I am confident that we'll prevail again, because it's really clear that these bans are riddled with animus and also target transgender people. It's not about a medical condition. So with that, I will stop, and I will turn it over to my colleague Carl, I believe, to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Sasha. I just want to talk about one last case in our fight against the Trump administration targeting trans people since the beginning of his second administration, and that's Schlachter versus U.S. Department of State. That's our challenge to the discriminatory passport policy, which stated that people cannot get passports that reflect their correct gender identity. They are required to have the marker that matches their sex assigned at birth. We filed a case against the Trump administration and this discriminatory policy in April of this year. We filed on behalf of 7 individuals, one of whom is pictured here, our lead plaintiff, Xander Schlachter. And we then filed a motion for preliminary injunction in May. And I'm happy to report that early in September, we received a great ruling from our judge in the District of Maryland, granting a preliminary injunction for 6 of our 7 clients. So 6 of our 7 clients have all received accurate passports now. And this is a separate case from the ACLU's case, Orr versus Trump, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And we brought this case, because from our view, you can't have enough courts telling the Trump administration that what they're doing is wrong. This was also an important case for us to bring because we have historically done a significant amount of work in terms of advocating for TGNCNBI people and access to accurate identity documents, including passports. We represented Dana Zim, who I'll talk about in a minute, in their vindication of their rights to receive a passport with an X gender marker on it, which resulted in 2022 in the Biden administration making that X gender marker available for all people. We, unfortunately, just about 10 days ago, the federal government did provide notice that they are appealing our preliminary injunction in Schlachter. So that will be heard by the Fourth Circuit in January.
Thank you so much, Carl and Sasha, for this incredible amount of work of litigation and countless hours working for our community and all of these gigantic lawsuits to defend our community. Now shifting a little bit towards a similar topic, which is passports and identity documents, which are very highly related to each other, of how trans folks navigate their lives and access government services and present themselves into the world, and how the government recognize themselves. So, Carl, you're one of the lawyers behind that lawsuit, but also involved in this work about passport and identity documents. What's happening, and how can people, what people should know about the state of the passports and identity documents?
Thank you, Sammy. A reporter asked me recently why passports matter for trans people. And I took the opportunity to illuminate for them, in a way that maybe they hadn't yet heard, how our society is structured around having an identity document that accurately reflects who you are. Think about every access to so many services and rights in our society depends on accurate identity documents, right? Accessing education, healthcare, going to the pharmacy, operating a motor vehicle. So many different parts of our lives are oriented around identity documents. And there's a separate discussion about whether that's the way we should do it, but the functional reality is that's how it is. And so this has been a bedrock of Lambda Legal's work for the last 10 years, ensuring that trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people can have documents that accurately reflect who they are, which we hope, and data shows, statistically reduces people's experiences of outright discrimination and rejection at all of those life choice points that I mentioned. So as I discussed, we filed Schlochter because it reflects our continued commitment to this line of work. And a big chunk of that work was on behalf of Dana Zim, who you see pictured on this slide on the far right. And we fought through 3 presidential administrations to secure Dana's right to a passport that accurately reflected their gender with an X. We started this lawsuit during the last Obama administration, through Trump 1, and finally resolved it during the Biden administration. Unfortunately, the Biden administration instituted a just policy that lots of people, anybody in fact, could get an X gender marker on their passport. Now, of course, fast forward to where we are now, the Trump administration reversed that policy and has instituted a draconian policy that, in fact, hasn't been the policy of the United States government for almost 35 years, right? For 35 years, people in the trans community have been able to access correct documentation in the federal government. And so this is a real reversal, not just of the last 5 years, but going back even further than that. So the first lawsuit filed against this discriminatory policy was brought by the ACLU in a case called Orr v. Trump. And in that case, the ACLU filed a motion for class certification, identifying that there were hundreds, in fact, thousands of people in a class who needed accurate identity documents, who needed accurate gender markers on their passports, And they were successful both at the preliminary injunction stage, and their court agreed that there was a class of people who needed accurate passports. Unfortunately, this decision was then immediately appealed to the First Circuit. And then, as you all well know, the federal government sought an emergency stay from the Supreme Court. And sadly, the Supreme Court granted that stay of the injunction on November 6th. So what that means practically for people at this point is that going forward, the discriminatory passport policy is in effect. But that does not do anything to change the fact that if you got a passport under the Orr attestation policy, under their preliminary injunction, that passport remains valid, as do any other valid passports, right? The government has, the Trump administration has not made attempts to invalidate any passports, whether they have an X, an M, or an F on them, or regardless of who they were issued to. So that is the most important top line message I want to convey today. The other important message I want to convey is that there continued to be no confirmed reports of anyone, including people with an X gender marker on their passport, being prevented from leaving the United States or being hassled or prevented to return to the United States after international travel. And that includes after all of these developments that have unfolded over the last 11 months. We know this because you and our community continue to contact us and tell us about your experience. And that is vital for us being able to convey accurate information and to know what steps we next need to take. So that's sort of the lay of the land, as it were, as it relates to passports. As of right now, the discriminatory passport policy is back in effect because the Supreme Court stayed the injunction in the Orr v. Trump case. And so we're going to have to wait and see how that case plays out. And we are confident that our colleagues at the ACLU will secure ultimate relief against this policy, but it may be that it is in effect for the duration until that case is resolved. I'll pass it over now to my colleague Whit to talk about birth certificates in the states.
Thank you so much, Carl. As Carl mentioned, identity documents are essential for safety, dignity, and everyday life. At the core of identity documents are birth certificates, and birth certificates are decided by the states. So we have a large diversity of policies and procedures around the country. I'm going to go through really quickly a bit of the different types of processes and how many states have those types of processes. So right now there are 8 states that completely prohibit any gender marker changes on birth certificates. If you were born in these states, the law currently unfortunately does not allow you to update your birth certificate at this time. Those states are Montana, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Indiana, Iowa, Tennessee, and Florida. And Iowa and Indiana were newly enacted in 2025. So again, just to highlight the importance of getting involved. In the rest of the country, it's possible for folks to update birth certificates, but the requirements vary widely. 14 states have administrative processes that do not require a person to provide additional information. In 12 states, 2 territories, and DC, administrative processes that require appropriate treatment are enacted, which could mean anything from needing a letter from a medical professional. In 6 states and 2 territories, there's an unclear process and/or medical requirements that are somewhat ambiguous. So discretion is very much left up to judges. In 2 states, there are administrative processes, but they require surgery. And then finally, there are 8 states and 1 territory that require a court order and proof of surgery. So as you can see, they vary widely. But the positive thing is that there are processes and policies in place that if you want to enact something in your state, there are good examples to look at around the country. Additionally, talking about ability for individuals to have an X marker on their birth certificates, there are at least 15 states plus DC that allow an individual to amend their birth certificate to have an X gender marker. So even though there are some states that are aggressively moving to restrict access, the broader national trend shows continued progress toward more accurate, inclusive, and humane identity documents and policies. As always, Lambda Legal will continue working to modernize these policies and challenge any discriminatory restrictions. Having an ID that reflects who you truly are should not depend on your zip code. And with that, I'll pass it back to Sammy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Whit. And birth certificates is one of the most important documents that people have. And just this past week, adding to what Whit said, Lambda Legal joined a case defending people, transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and intersex people in Puerto Rico. And the case is being argued in the First Circuit of Appeal in Boston by our colleague Omar Gonzalez Pagan. So that we'll have to see and wait and see what happens in that case in the First Circuit that has a lot of states in the Northeast. In addition to litigation in all of these courts, there's a lot of things happening in Washington, D.C., in Congress and federal agencies. And we do have an office, a staff and Ali and many others are based in DC. Lambda Legal has 8 offices and staff all across the country working on the ground. But from our DC office, Ali, how are you tracking these policies? What's happening in regards to the executive actions and how these policies are being implemented? And, last year we just had the shutdown, and there was a lot of conversation about how trans communities were part of those negotiations. And what can you say about that?
Thank you so much, Sammy. So just as a bit of an overview and obviously an understatement, the federal front is a major front in the attacks against the trans non-binary community. And so federal agencies are currently rolling back a lot of inclusive and equitable policies that have been passed in the past few years, pursuant to this administration's executive orders, which we've talked about so much today. So many of our lawsuits are based on those executive orders. So we're going to talk a little bit about what these agencies are and how they work. This will be super duper brief. We're going to keep it Schoolhouse Rock style to age myself a little bit here and try to keep it very top level. So executive agencies they basically work to implement the president's policies as he wants them to be. So they, carry out and enforce the law on behalf of the president. These executive orders are directives to these agencies on how the president wants them to execute or carry out these laws. So these federal agencies are over things, public services and things that impact your everyday life, like Social Security, SNAP, Medicaid, any public housing program that falls under HUD. These are all things that are impacted by executive orders and things like that. So these agencies, they get the directive from the president, that's the executive order, and they issue these rules and regulations and different pieces of guidance to tell all of their different programs how to be in line with what the president wants and how to enforce all of these new rules. So just to say, as a side note, there's a huge process about how to pass all of these rules and regulations, and there's a lot of back and forth, or there's supposed to be, between the government and the people with how these policies will, if they will even go into effect, if they're going to pass the rule or not. So with rulemaking, they open a comment period, and people and interested parties like Lambda and other policy organizations that are trying to advance the civil rights and protect groups, we will often write comments saying this is not good, or this is good. Here are the ways that it will help or hurt. And not surprisingly, the administration is not really following the rulemaking process as is intended. So we're still doing everything we can on our end. We're still putting in all of our comments and trying to say, hey, this is how it's going to affect our people. Hey, this is going to disproportionately hurt this group, all of that. So that's kind of the background on how these executive orders actually kind of function once they're issued. So these are just a couple of examples. These are all related to the infamous gender essentialism EO, the trans erasure EO, however it is that you think of it, that we've been talking actually quite a lot about today. So for example, the State Department changing the rules around passport gender markers, that's all a part of them following that directive from the president earlier this year, right? He issued that executive order. I'm sure you remember all of the hullabaloo about when that came out. And that was all a directive to the different departments under the executive branch. Here's how I want things to go. So the passport change, rule change, that is related to this executive order. Same with an upcoming possible rule that is being talked about, which is repealing what is called the equal access rule, which would house folks in shelters and programs under HUD who are unhoused. Let me be clear. House folks in housing programs and facilities that align with their gender. The rule as proposed would threaten programs and threaten people who are just looking for shelter to be housed somewhere that is comfortable and safe for them. And then my third example is Department of Health and Human Services. They recently, or this year, rescinded some guidance around how to implement a rule under the Affordable Care Act that helps protect folks from gender identity discrimination. And basically, the Trump administration has rescinded that guidance and basically is trying to green light discrimination under certain circumstances in certain medical contexts based off of one's gender identity. And so that's kind of the Cliff Notes, again, dating myself here, of what's been going on in executive agencies. Basically, they're taking these executive orders and they are implementing all of these harmful policies that are going to trickle down to everyday people.
Thank you so much, Ali. So we have covered litigation in the courts at the state and federal level, and also policy at the federal level. Um, and we would like to touch a little bit about what's happening on the states. A lot of movement in the past few years at the state legislatures with the introduction of many of the anti-trans bills. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's the work being done at the state level?
Thank you, Sammy. To get a sort of big picture of what's happening at the state level, in 2025, there were 1,011 anti-trans bills introduced across 49 states. It is another record year. Each year seems to be a new record. Of those states, only 124 passed. 382 failed outright. And the remainder are in this kind of like purgatory situation where they're still pending and can carry over into the next session. But it is so important for us to take a moment to celebrate the fraction of bills that passed this past session. It's also important to remember that while many harmful bills did pass, even more were stopped. And that's because people spoke up, organized, and fought back. Not every state is moving in the same direction. Some have enacted protections for trans people, whether by safeguarding gender-affirming care, enhancing non-discrimination laws, or creating like refugee policies for trans youth and families. So while that 1,000 number may be very scary, there is some hope, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Looking forward to 2026, we unfortunately expect another record-breaking year of legislative activity. Based on early signs in last session, we anticipate initiatives that focus on banning access to gender-affirming care for individuals in custody, which is especially important as our community is overrepresented in the criminal legal system. Also, state-funded gender-affirming care for adults, again, where our community is often overrepresented for folks who are living below the poverty line. State-funded medical care could have a really big impact on many of us. Another thing that we are looking out for is the issue around parent rights and child welfare, and the assertion that gender-affirming care is abusive for children, and that parents have the right to know when their children come out, which results in a forced outing situation at schools. And then finally, what upsets us all, more bathroom bans, which is wild because it does not keep anyone safer. And I know it's upsetting and it's heavy, but it's important for us to remember that we can fight back. We can get involved. You can call and email your legislators. You can submit or make in-person testimony at legislative sessions. As Ali was speaking about the regulations, state agencies have regulations as well, so you can get involved in the commenting period. And most importantly, you can actively advocate for policies that protect and uplift trans people, especially youth. And so it's just really important that we're taking this moment again to come together and show up for one another.
Thank you so much, Whit. And with all of this litigation and state policies, many of these lawsuits are reaching the Supreme Court. And Lambda Legal has lawsuits at the state level, federal level, and some of them are going to the Supreme Court. Sasha, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with some of these lawsuits that are reaching the Supreme Court, and what are the next steps in some of them?
Yeah, thank you, Sammy. I'm going to talk about one of them, and I think Carl's going to talk about another, but I think we can, if we have time, we can dip into some of the other cases that might touch on LGBTQ issues. But the one I think we really want to talk about today is the BPJ versus the West Virginia State Board of Education. which is a case that, and I will ask my colleague Carl to help me if I miss anything here, because he literally gave the best presentation I've ever seen in my entire life a couple of months ago on this issue. So I'll defer to him after I'm finished. But the case involves a trans girl who in 2021 was part of a group of kids that were impacted by this wave of legislation seeking to ban trans kids from playing sports. And her name is Becky Pepper Jackson. She's wonderful. I got to meet her for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and just wants to play track and field and with her teammates, and has, it's been such a wonderful experience for her. We were able to work with the ACLU and enjoining the bill, from going into effect and allowing her to participate. And we asked the court to issue a final injunction on the issue, and the court changed its mind for whatever reason after a couple of years and reversed their decision. So we asked the Fourth Circuit to step in and stay that, and the state of West Virginia felt like it was so important that they prohibit her from playing that they asked the Supreme Court to step in and prevent her from being able to run track. And we weren't even bringing this case as a facial challenge. We were just asking the court to rule in this one specific case, her case. And the Supreme Court thankfully didn't take the bait and let her participate. So that was really great. And she's just glowing from the experiences she's had, being able to participate. And unfortunately, the defendants here have sought to appeal the Fourth Circuit's decision to the Supreme Court, and that's what's going to be happening. There's going to be an oral argument on January 13th at the Supreme Court on this question of whether just her can participate in athletics, and it's being merged with a case that was argued in the Ninth Circuit involving another trans girl, and the court's going to be hearing arguments there. I think there's a couple things I just wanted to flag about this that I think are important with regard to things that are just important things to emphasize about the case. And I think one of I'm not a messaging expert, but I think one really important thing to emphasize is that there's a great amount of harm that comes from when people are excluded. I think everybody can relate to, anybody that wants to play sports. I shouldn't assume everybody wants to play sports, but everybody that does want to play sports can relate to being benched or not being able to participate, and how badly that feels. And just imagine being told that you can't participate at all. There's no way that she's going to ever participate on a boys' team. She's been very clear. So denying her the ability to participate with her peers completely strips her of all of those things that come from being able to play sports. Stick-to-itiveness, leadership, discipline. All of those things that shape leaders and people and make communities stronger. I think another point to make too is that this is just bad for everyone. It's bad for trans folks in particular, obviously, because they're affected. But this is about enforcing social roles. This is about harming non-transgender girls and women, because it's already led to harm. Because there's people that are accusing players of being transgender. And there was cases involved. There are cases, that were litigated in Utah and Florida involving whether somebody was a transgender person if they don't fit this cookie cutter idea about who, what a girl should look like. And there's also a lot of these, provisions have these requirements that people prove their gender through either invasive, procedures to test their chromosomes. Even I think Idaho had one of those requirements in their bill, or at the very minimum to, they can demand that you provide your birth certificate, just because you don't fit the stereotype of what it means to look like a girl. So I think those are really important points to make, in talking about this, and especially the harms of exclusion in talking about the case. So the case will get argued on January 13th in the Supreme Court. I think some other folks are going to talk about what's going to happen along with that. But I just want to reinforce that, we have asked the court just to, look at this as an applied challenge. But whatever happens in June when this decision is issued, Lambda Legal will continue to fight and will continue to defend our community at every stake. And I think there is some room for optimism here. This court, the Supreme Court, ruled on a very close, case questioning whether Title VII protected transgender people just 5 years ago, and ruled in favor of a transgender plaintiff in the Bostock case. So those are really the things I wanted to add. I will turn it over to Carl to finish up the Supreme Court review.
Thanks, Sasha. That was a great overview with a very strict time constraints we're under. So nicely done. And we really hope everyone will join us on January 13th. There will be a rally outside the Supreme Court, along with our partners, ACLU National, ACLU West Virginia, and some other folks who will be there for another case involving a trans athlete. So I want to very quickly raise up a case that is currently pending before the Supreme Court. It's already been briefed. It's already been argued. Oral argument happened earlier this fall, and that's Childs v. Salazar. And that's a case where our opponents, the Alliance Defending Freedom, don't be fooled by their name. They're not defending anybody's freedom, maybe people's freedom to discriminate. They brought a case challenging Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. And folks may know conversion therapy, of course, is therapy aimed at changing a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. The law was written very narrowly. It only constrains professional conduct of licensed professionals. It doesn't tell religious counselors, so-called religious counselors, how they can conduct their therapy. But this licensed therapist in Colorado is challenging that as a violation of her First Amendment rights. And so unfortunately, that case is before the Supreme Court now. We will get a decision from them in June. But it's an incredibly important issue because there are 20 or more states, probably more by this count, that also ban this kind of therapy because it is well documented to be incredibly harmful to so many LGBTQ people, including myself. I was subjected to conversion therapy, ironically, also in Colorado. And I'm so proud of my home state for passing this law, preventing this harm to be done to young people and in some cases even to adults. So keep an eye on that case. There were a lot of people and groups who submitted amicus briefs encouraging the court to rule on the side of Colorado and their right to prevent harm to the residents of that state and prevent them from being subjected to conversion therapy. I'll turn it back over to you, Sammy.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, everyone. Now we're almost at time, but I know that there's a lot of engagement. There's hundreds of you on watching this and have a lot of questions. First, I would like to say that we're going to try to answer the questions that we can, but because lawyers, right, are bound by ethics and rules, we cannot provide legal advice to individual cases. However, Lambda Legal has a help desk, a legal help desk that you can contact, and they will be able to provide you to resources and information. We will share the slide soon, but before that, here it is already on the slide. If you want to take a screenshot, but you could visit it at lambdalegal.org help desk, and one of our lawyers will be able to share information and resources, although we cannot provide legal advice. We receive over 200 questions, and we keep receiving in the chat as I see, but I will try in the next few minutes to see if the lawyers can give very quick answers. I know that's very hard because it's law and it takes very complicated question. But I have a few questions here. What can states that have LGBTQ and trans-affirming policymakers can do to keep trans kids safe? And how can people join those efforts? Does anyone wants to take this question?
I mean, I can start with it, for sure. I think it'd be good to get a round robin going, but I think that,
Yes.
Continuing to build on what's already being done, with a lot of states have passed shield laws, to prohibit, there's this, persecution, that's happening with providers of gender-affirming care, just like with abortion that we've seen, where some of these really anti-trans political figures are seeking to initiate lawsuits, or trying to prosecute providers of gender-affirming care, even when they're they're practicing in a state that's very supportive of trans people, and they've passed laws that prohibit those states from reaching into their states and trying to to litigate. So I think common sense provisions like that, you're reassuring the trans community and the non-binary community that they're wanted and safe, and that this is an inclusive environment. Reduce, like some of the things that Whit was talking about with lowering the barriers to legal recognition. To get birth certificates. Not requiring, for example, a lot of medical requirements to get identity documents that match who they are, especially given the hostile climates that a lot of people are coming from. It's really important that people are able to get ID that matches who they are. So there's just a couple ideas.
Thank you, Sasha. Carl, I know we have a lot of questions about passport and that we have resources and you will guide people to the right resources, but there's still many questions about passports, such as what's the current restrictions? What can people do thinking about traveling?
Thanks, Sammy. Yeah, again, important to underscore, there are no restrictions. If you have a valid passport is issued under the or preliminary injunction, or whether you received that passport before the Trump administration instituted this discriminatory policy, your valid passport remains valid, and the State Department website says as much. And again, we have stayed in contact since January. Trans, non-binary, gender nonconforming, and intersex people have reached out to us and said, I'm traveling at this time. I have this on my passport. Can I stay in touch with you and let you know what happens? And that has been a great resource for us to be able to confirm that people are not experiencing discrimination or any restriction on travel, right? Whether they're leaving the United States or returning to the United States from a variety of trips abroad. I'm happy to report that information given the focus of the federal government on this like tiny population of people and our ability to move freely just like other people. So we continue to get information from trans people who are traveling. I encourage folks to both reach out to our help desk for connection to resources, but we also have an identity document resource page that we've been continuously updating since actually November of 2024, when Sasha was involved in putting it all together in the first instance, and now the whole team is involved in making sure that resource is as up to date as possible. So I encourage folks to take a look at the information there. If you have specific questions, again, legal help desk is a great resource, and we're able to then see if there's someone in your state that we can connect you to. Oftentimes those are the state-based equality groups, and many people are looking to help, right? Lots of folks are looking to provide accurate information and make sure that people understand how all of this impacts them. So please don't hesitate to reach out and get the information you need. You don't need to, on top of dealing with the discriminatory passport policy, you don't also need to not have the information you need. So we want to be a resource to you all.
Thank you, Carl. And as a reminder, we have a link to that resource on the YouTube page and also in our website, lambdalegal.org. We will later share. And also we will send an email to all of those that RSVP to this webinar with those links. But stay tuned to our website because that's where we update all of this information. We got a lot of other questions. People asking, what can I do? What can allies do? How can parents take actions to protect their kids? But people want to know what can they do in their everyday life. Whit.
Thank you so much, Sammy. There is so much that people can do in their everyday life. One of the issues that we're running into is the opposition are using myths in order to create fear and distrust of the trans community. As an ally, you can do your research and you can interrupt when individuals make those statements. For example, there's no evidence linking inclusive bathroom policies to crime or criminal activity. Absolutely none. What we actually see is that restrictive bathroom laws increase harassment and danger for both transgender and cisgender people. So there are different things like that you can look at and interrupt immediately. Support the trans people in your life emotionally, socially, and economically if need be. The impact of discrimination can be great, not only mentally, emotionally, and physically, but also economically. And so where we can, it's important to support each other. You can use your platforms, use art, social media, organizing, again, to spread the truth, engage your community, engage those around you. It's a moment for us to turn fear and disinformation into action through community engagement. Go to the legislative session, speak to your legislators, get involved in regulatory processes. These are all very important and great ways to create change.
Thank you, Whit. And a lot of people have asked or are wondering why are very concerned about the types of decisions that the Supreme Court is issuing. And they're asking, is this the right time to go? Why are we going? And there's that uncertainty about our legal system. What would you say, Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think part of, the answer is that, well, in this case, in the BPJ matter, that was not, something that we asked the Supreme Court to take up. It was because, we were successful on behalf of Becky Pepper Jackson, again, as an as-applied challenge. So we've been very careful. I think there is, again, some room for optimism here, given the fact that they did not, take up the case to, prohibit her from playing to begin with, and they did issue the Bostock decision. But I think it's also important to know that I think that there is some degree of a sense that, there's this court capture from the other side, the folks that are anti-trans, pushing anti-trans agendas, that they feel like this is their time and they're pushing up these cases as quickly as they can. And a lot of them don't have the kind of fact pattern that we have, here, or in the case in Scrimetti. So I think that, in this case, it really wasn't, our decision to go to the Supreme Court. We were defending it. So I think that it's just, part of, and we also have a responsibility to defend our community. We can't, stand by and watch, young people's lives be destroyed by discriminatory measures. So I think there's, a lot of caution that goes into, whatever, steps we take through litigation. But in this case, I think it would, again, we have to go to the Supreme Court because the other side has appealed it. And we want to make sure that there's a good record, that we are going to the Supreme Court with.
Thank you, Sasha. Does anyone wants to give some closing thoughts before we share resources? Well, now we want to share the type of resources that were shared today during this webinar. I know that we still have hundreds of other questions, and we are going to make sure that we're sharing those via email to those RSVP. If you didn't RSVP and you're watching this, you can go to our website that is there, lambdalegal.org, and sign up so that you could continue to have our emails. In our website and through this webinar, we have shared some of the resources like the document guidance for trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people, where there are a lot of answers to what Carl was sharing about passports and identity documents. We also have a tracker of the litigation and lawsuits that we have filed against the trans anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans litigation. You could see more information about these lawsuits. We also on our website have, as Sasha mentioned, full pages of what we are saying and what the files and the documents that were filed in the lawsuits, in the courts for our lawsuits. And we also have a section under news that has the press releases and statements that you could use some of that messaging in your state, in your networks, and how we're talking about these issues. And we also have the Lambda Legal Help Desk that if you have a particular question about your case, you could share that. I don't know if we can quickly share about, in the next slide, the help desk. Well, the help desk, that's the link for our help desk that we mentioned before. You send a message to our legal help desk, and our team of lawyers will provide legal information and resources related to some of the legal questions that you might have. In addition to the help desk, if we can see the next slide, as Carl and Sasha mentioned, we are going to the Supreme Court for our argument. I saw one question on the YouTube chat. We're going to be in front of the Supreme Court that day. And also in different states, people are organizing to raise their voices in support of trans rights. So please stay tuned at your email how you can get involved to be able to be in solidarity with the trans youth of these lawsuits. And finally, this work is being able, it's able by your generosity and your support. And so if you feel compelled to support our work with a financial donation, that's the QR code to donate. But following us and stay tuned is part of all of this work and support. Here you have one of our latest campaigns, All Rise, for trans youth and many other audiences. As a reminder, you are going to receive all of these links and resources via email, but they're also in the description of the YouTube channel. And now, if any of you want to give some very quick final closing thoughts to wrap, thank you all for attending. Thank you for taking time of your day. I know we're a little bit over, but we wanted to make sure that we answer as much as question as possible. Does Carl, Whit, Sasha, Ali wants to say anything to close down?
I'll just start and say I really appreciate, again, everybody joining us today. Love you all, and just want you to know that you're seen and adored. And please keep watching, our Facebook pages or our social media, and feel free to contact us if you have further questions after this. But I'll turn it over to Whit or Ali or anybody else, or Carl that wants to give a comment.
I can go next. Sorry, Whit. No, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, we're here for you. We've gotten through this in the past. We're stronger together, and every act of support, every connection, donation, rally, and vote helps us build a safer future. And it's important for us to remember to take care of ourselves and each other, take breaks when you need to, but don't lose hope. Hope in and of itself is an act of resistance. And when we get the opportunity to nurture it together, it becomes unstoppable. We're stronger together, and we'll build the world that our community deserves together.
Ali?
I have a slightly more beautiful things. I just want to say something a little more concrete and specific that you can do. It's 2026 is around the corner. A lot of these electeds, their seats are up for grabs, and they need to be reminded who they work for, which is us. And so you need to be stalking all of your electeds in a legally speaking, don't do anything illegal, but you need to be really on those switchboards calling your representative. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you are doing everything you can. I don't want to give the impression that federal elections are all that matter, but I do federal policy, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Make sure you are doing everything you can to push your electeds to not vote for any policies that are going to be anti-trans. Make sure that they are keeping any of that stuff out of any funding bills that might be coming up in January, which they will be. And then more than that, cis people who are out there listening, we need you all flooding the switchboards. We need it to be clear that trans folks are not the only ones who care about this and who are out here supporting and fighting for trans folks. So we need y'all out here making these calls. We need you out there when we're protesting on the front line with us, not leading, but putting your bodies out there for us and making sure that it's clear that this is a greater community and it's not just something that trans folks care about.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, all of the speakers. Thank you, all of the lawyers and Lambda Legal staff. And thank you, all the audience, for joining us today.